Hello, this is Terrence King, and this is 3D modeling for 3D printing. In this lesson, I will be discussing the Solidify modifier. We're going to start out with our cube. Come up to the tool shelf, find our little wrench up here, add modifier, and go down to Solidify. Now, let's go ahead and go into the bone view. Let's go ahead and increase this thickness. So let's go ahead and, as I increase the thickness, you can see the inside cube getting smaller. So let's go ahead and type in 0.5. In Blender, all dimensions right here are measured in millimeters. So this is a direct reflection of the measurements per scale. So in order to understand that, let's go ahead and look at right here on the side. Our scale is 1:1 to 1, and the dimensions of this cube are 2 millimeters by 2 millimeters by 2 millimeters on the X, Y, and Z axis. So this thickness from the outside of the cube to the inside cube, right now this is actually going to be a hollow space. Right now this thickness between here and here is 0.5 millimeter, 0.5 millimeters. So if we were to scale this up, let's go ahead and change the dimensions of this to 25.4 millimeters. Why 25.4? Well, that is an inch. That is your measurement for how to measure an inch. Alright, if you look at here, that thickness, even though I want the thickness of the wall to be 0.5 millimeter, that thickness is still in proportion to its scale. So that thickness, 0.5 millimeters, is actually multiplied by 12.7 of the scale. So in order to overcome that, we just scaled our object up. This is useful for video game files or anything that you might want to turn into armor, such as Pepicura. It might start out at a different dimension that you want. So what you need to do is scale first, select Object, Apply, Scale. Now what did that just do? That just made the thickness of my wall go down to 0.5 millimeters. So that's 0.5 millimeter thick wall. And if you look over here, my scale is now 1:1 to 1 again. So let's go ahead and make this a 5 millimeter thick wall. Let's go ahead and apply that. So what did that do? That created a cube on the inside. Notice that it's not touching anything of the outside cube. It does not have any connecting edges. So this vertice and this vertice are not connected. We do not want anything connected because that means it is trying to make that a solid surface. You do not want solid surfaces going through an object. You will get some strange results. Some slicing software that you might use for your 3D printing might be able to overcome or compensate for those extra vertices and extra faces on the inside, but in most cases it's gonna yield a strange result. So we do not want that. Now one thing to look at, let's go in the overhead view right here. One thing to look at is the normals of the faces. Okay, you've got your normals facing outside all the way around the outside cube. Now the inside cube, all the faces are facing inside. Why is that? Well, that is the outside surface of the hollow area. So if I were to print this, then it will be printed with a hollow core. And if I were to drill a hole through this, then I will be able to see that hollow core in there. If I were printing this with supports, then of course it's going to be full of all the supports rather than an infill. All this area right here will be filled in with infill, depending on how many layers I have for solid infill or what percentage of infill I have. I hope you're not confused. That is basically what Solidify is. Now you can go and say we started out, let's go ahead and undo. Let's go ahead and delete that. Alright. Now we want to create a box, something to put something in. So let's go ahead and tab into edit mode. Let's select one of the faces. Delete that face. Okay. Now this is not a printable object. I have experience in trying to print with an open face like that. Usually if it's on the bottom that you have an open face, then it's just going to go ahead and fill that in. I'm not real sure about the top. Your slicing software is actually doing a collision detection, so it's going checking all points on each layer to find out where it's colliding with until it gets to nothing up here. So you could end up printing a solid box, you could be printing absolutely nothing. But in order to actually get a three-dimensional box, something with a surface on all sides, let's go ahead and add that Solidify modifier, and let's make it 0.5 millimeter thick. So if we look at here, let's go ahead and zoom in at this corner up here. Okay, everything's nice and flat. Everything's nice right angles. Zoom back out. Okay, let's go ahead and apply all modifiers in object mode. Apply that. Tab back into it. Now we have our faces facing inward. So now we've got a thickness. So this is probably, you know, as thick or probably as thick as some construction paper. So it's going to be printing depending on the size of your nozzle and the layer height that you're printing with. Most people probably have a nozzle of 0.5 millimeters, so 0.5 millimeter thick nozzle. But your layer height, you might be printing at 100 microns or 250 microns. That's just, you know, 1/10 of a millimeter. So 0.5 millimeter. So you're going to be printing 5 layers at 100 microns down here at the bottom, and then however many it's going to take to get to the top. But the thickness of this wall right here isn't going to be any thinner than what your nozzle is, generally speaking. In order to check this, Blender has a nice new feature that you can do a mesh analysis. Alright, so we want to check our thickness. I'll get into mesh analysis later, but let's go ahead and check our thickness. We want a thickness of, let's say if we want to get a thickness of 0.75. That's going to highlight everything and tell me that I'm not going to get a thickness of 0.75. This color is giving me a warning about all that. So let's go ahead and select our outside edges or outside faces. Scale in all directions, but see, as I'm scaling it up, the color is changing. So it's becoming a cooler and cooler color, saying that I'm getting within tolerance. And then whenever the color disappears, I'm within tolerance on that. And I haven't moved the bottom box till about right there. So as I'm scaling it down right here, I'm getting into the warmer color. So now it's red. So that means it's definitely not within that tolerance. Scroll back out. Yellows, greens, blues, and darker colors. So that's a good way to check and see if you're going to be able to print any of your objects properly, just go ahead and go into the mesh analysis, have that checked, find your thickness, and just in this maximum number right here, this is a minimum number and this is your maximum. So in the max, just go ahead and type in your nozzle size, probably 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, half a millimeter. Hit enter, and I can print that. So let's go ahead and undo everything. Okay, so that's just telling me that it's kind of a warning right now. It is 0.5, a half a millimeter thick, but it's just at its minimum tolerance. More on that later.